The college football season is finally upon us. And with this new playoff format, nobody really knows exactly how it's going to turn out. But I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what we can expect. And I have some opinions here that might be controversial. But this is what I expect to happen in this season. And these are my predictions. And then end of the season, we'll come back to this list and see if it's spot on, what I got wrong. And people will probably make fun of me. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And just in case, if you guys don't know how these playoffs work, the top four that get a first round bye is the Big Ten champions, the Big 12 champions, the SEC champs, and the ACC champs. And then the highest rated Group of 5 champion gets an automatic bid no matter what. Some people hate it. I honestly really like it. It gives some teams who would never ever have a chance of making this playoffs actually have a chance to make it. But people don't really like it. And then the 7 remaining teams is just the highest ranked remaining teams on the college football playoff top 25 list. So moving to my predictions, I think that the SEC champ, the number 1 seed, will be Texas. I just think this is their year. I'm not very high on Carson Beck, and Georgia I think obviously is going to be really good, but they lost a solid amount of players, and I think it's going to be Texas-Georgia playing for the SEC championship, and I could totally see Texas running the table with this and ending the season as the number 1 seed. Next, as my number 2 seed, I have the Big Ten champs, Oregon. Now, this is definitely insane to some people. Everyone's expecting Ohio State to just be amazing. But I am very low on Will Howard. I don't think he's really as good as people are saying he is. And yeah, they got a great team, but we already saw last year. Ohio State did not win any big games because of their quarterback problems with Cal McCord. I think that Will Howard is just a bigger Cal McCord. I don't think he was that good on Kansas State. So I just don't see how people think he's just going to turn into an all-star just because he's on a better team. So for that reason, I have Oregon and surprise, surprise, Penn State finally getting over the hump and playing for the Big Ten championship, and Oregon eventually winning. Now that's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, I know, but we just got to come back and see if it's correct. And if it is, I'm saving this video. If it's not, I'll probably push it under the table or something. Next, as my 3 seed, I have Miami. Now, a lot of people think Clemson is going to win it, and it's between them and Florida State. But I'm low on Florida State. As you can all see already, they already lost to Georgia Tech. But I just think Clemson is not fully back yet. I think they're going to be good. I have Clemson and Miami playing in the ACC championship. But I've heard a lot of great things about Miami this year, and I think they could really have a surprising squad. And will they be like a dominant force? Probably not. But as we all know, the ACC is not a very rigorous and tough conference. So I can totally see Miami doing what they need to do and then beating Clemson in the ACC championship and getting that number 3 seed. And then finally, for the Big 12 champ and my number 4 seed, I have Kansas. Now this is definitely a big shock to a lot of people, but I am big on Kansas right now. I remember them 3-4 years ago when they were struggling to win 1 or 2 games. They have flipped the script on its head. And I think things are going in the right direction for Kansas. A lot of people have Utah, Arizona winning the Big 12. I'm just not very high on new teams coming into new conferences winning that conference. Now, I know I have Oregon winning the Big 10, but I'm just not very high on Utah or Arizona winning the Big 12. I just don't think that's going to happen. I do have Kansas playing Utah just because how the scheduling works out. And then I have Kansas pulling off the upset. But either way, even if Kansas loses that Big 12 championship game, I still think they can make the playoffs. So I can totally see them maybe losing 2 games, but anything more than 2 games I feel like would be a pretty big surprise. Now, you all know the Big 12, you can lose any given game, but I think Kansas has a real shot of making the playoffs and even winning the Big 12 this year. Might be controversial, but it's honestly what I believe. Now, with those conference champions out of the way, we move on to the top 7 remaining ranked teams. And at number 4, I have Georgia. I have them above Kansas, but since Kansas won the Big 12, they would automatically get that 4 seed and the first round bye. I think Georgia's going to have a great season. I think they do drop 1 during the regular season. Whether it's to Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, or Tennessee, or even Clemson in Week 1, they play a lot of great teams, and I just can't see them beating every single team. If they get to the end of the year undefeated, I am very worried about me saying they're not going to win the SEC. Because if they can get through these, honestly, 4 to 5 juggernauts, like top teams in the college football, and beat every single one of them, I think they'll win it all. But I just don't think that's going to happen. So I think they're still going to be a very, very strong team. I think they drop 1, maybe 2, to one of those 5 teams I just listed. And that puts them at the top number 5 seed. That's not a conference champion. Moving on to the 6th seed, I have Ole Miss. Now on my rankings, I have Ole Miss at 6, right behind Kansas. And I think Ole Miss is going to have a great year. I really do. They have a remarkably easier schedule than Georgia. It's still tough, but they only play 3 ranked teams in LSU, Oklahoma, and Georgia. And I think they can win LSU and Oklahoma. I'm not super high on LSU, but I think that Ole Miss could have a great year. And just because the SEC is the SEC, I don't think they'll make it to the championship game. But I think Ole Miss will be soaring going into the playoffs. And I think they'll be right behind Georgia after Georgia has that loss in the SEC championship. Right behind them, I have Penn State. This is the year I think Penn State can make a run and finally beat Ohio State or Michigan. Or honestly, both of them. As I said already, I'm pretty low on Ohio State. I know a lot of people think they're going to be so good, but I just don't see Will Howard carrying them to be like this dominant force. And we all know Michigan. They're in a lot of shit right now, and they lost a ton of players. I don't think Michigan's going to be nearly the level they were the last couple of years. They'll still be decent, but I just don't think they have a chance of being like amazing. So if there's ever a year for Penn State to make that jump, I think it's now. And I still think they can't go all the way. I still think they lose in the Big Ten championship game to Oregon. But, I mean, if they beat Michigan and Ohio State, I don't see why, like, them riding on their high horse, that they wouldn't win the Big Ten championship also. If you're a Penn State fan, I think this is your year. This is the year. It's go now. If you can't win now, I think James Franklin is under some serious heat because they need to do something this year, as the rivals, in my opinion, are not what they have been in the past years. Moving on to the 8th seed, that takes us to Clemson, the ACC championship game losers. Like I said earlier, I think that Clemson will take a big step up, but I just don't think they'll be nearly back to like that 2016 Clemson that won the national championship. That being said, though, I mean, they have a very easy schedule again. ACC schedules are not very rigorous, and I think they'll be pretty highly ranked going into the ACC game, and even if they lose it, I think they still make the playoffs as an 8 seed. Moving on to the 9 seed, I have Ohio State. Now, this is the big thing that's going to get people mad, I feel like. But Ohio State has a tough schedule, all things regarding Big Ten scheduling. They play Iowa, which I think they're going to beat Iowa, but I think it could be a tough game. Then Oregon, then Nebraska, Penn State, and then they end the year at Michigan. I think Oregon is going to be a tough game. If they can get through Oregon, that will have their confidence soaring, and that will completely change the trajectory of their season. But if they lose that Oregon game, they come right back home to Nebraska, which I think Nebraska has a chance of kind of being a dark horse, honestly. And then right after that, at Penn State. If they drop Oregon and Penn State, I don't think they're going to be in the Big Ten championship game. I just don't see how that's possible. And on top of that, they have Michigan, last game of the year. And I don't think Michigan's going to be nearly what they were last year. But rivalry games, it doesn't really matter where you're at, because we all know how rivalry games go. So that's a very losable game for Ohio State. And at week 12 of the season, I have a feeling that it's not going to matter win or lose. I feel like it's going to be already locked in, Penn State and Oregon. So they're still going to be a good team and still going to make the playoffs. But I kind of think they hobble into it a little bit, especially if they lose that game to Michigan. That Michigan game could even knock them out of the playoffs. As crazy as that sounds as a 12-team playoffs, I feel like that is a possibility. I am just not high on Will Howard and Ohio State right now. That brings us to the 10th seed, which I have Utah. I just don't trust Utah all that much. They don't have the toughest schedule. They have 2 back-to-back games at Oklahoma State and then at home against Arizona. And if they drop 1 or 2 of those games, I think they could be in some trouble. After that, they have 7 straight Big 12 games to end off the season. And a new team joining a new conference, I feel like they're going to drop at least 1 of those games. Honestly, maybe even 2. I still think they make it to the Big 12 championship, and then Kansas beats them. I could see that game going either way. But if they lose to Kansas, They probably won't be a top 5 team going into that game, just because I think they might drop a couple games in the regular season going into the Big 12 championship. So I think they drop pretty low after losing that game, but I still think they sneak into the playoffs at the 10 seed. And then at the 11 seed, the final ranked team to make it into the playoffs before the Group 5 team, I think LSU. Now LSU has a decently tough schedule. I'm not going to lie. Like, they could totally be unranked by the end of the year. Some hard games they have is week 1 they play USC, which I think they'll beat the USC pretty easily, honestly. Then they have a few games in between before they play Ole Miss at home, then at Texas A&M, at home to Alabama, and then the last game of the year they play Oklahoma. I think LSU will drop half of those games maybe. I think they're losing to Alabama and Ole Miss, and they could possibly lose to A&M or Oklahoma. And I think that drops them a lot, but I think they could possibly sneak in at that last spot. And then for that final 12 seed, the Group of 5 winner, I have Liberty. Now how this Group of 5 works is if Liberty somehow is ranked like 8, they'll get in as the 8th seed. But if they're ranked below the 12th seed, which I have them at 23, they'll be the 12th seed. I think that Liberty is the obvious favorite. They've been very dominant in the Group of 5 in the past 5 years. And they're returning their star quarterback, Kaidon Salter. Don't even know if that's how you say his name exactly, but he's a dog. So I think they're the obvious favorites, and they are pretty decently big betting favorites to be the Group of 5 winners as well. It seems to be between Liberty, Boise State, and App State. I don't see the hype for Boise State, but I hear a lot of people talking about Boise State could be the Group of 5 team to make it. And then App State, I feel like if they handle their business, they play Liberty week 5. And if they can beat Liberty and win the Sun Belt, I think they will probably get it. But I have Liberty winning. They've been dominant in the past 5 years in Group of 5 play. And I think that Liberty will get that 12th seed and then get boat raced by Georgia. Now, if everything I said is correct, that means that I would have Notre Dame, Alabama, Missouri, the first 3 out. I'm not too high in Missouri. I'm never high in Notre Dame. I always think they're overrated. But I could totally see Notre Dame sneaking in instead of LSU, or even them sneaking in instead of Utah. I can see both of those things happening. I just don't think Notre Dame has what it takes, honestly. Every single year, they're always expected such great things, and they never do it. The fact that they're not in a conference, I think, hurts them. And I just don't think they're going to be able to have what it takes to make it. Alabama, haven't talked about them at all yet. But I think they fall off a little bit. Not because of Kalen DeBoer. Although I think he's not as good a coach as Nick Saban. Obviously, that's not a knock on Kalen DeBoer. But it's because they lost so many players, a new coaching staff, they need their new players. It's going to take a few years for them to get back to that level of Alabama standard. And I think they missed the playoffs the first year of the 12-team playoff. So that's it. This is my 12-team playoff prediction. Now moving on to who I think is going to win. I'm not going to do that because I think that's just going too far. Half the stuff will probably be completely false by the time the year ends anyways. But this is my 12-team playoff preseason prediction. Let me know what you guys think. I'm always down to talk about anything. I'm always down to hear criticism. I know I'm going to have a lot of criticism about Kansas, Miami, Ohio State, all those predictions I have made. But I stand by it. I won't change my predictions, but I do stand by it. If you guys did enjoy this video, please subscribe. Just starting out this channel, and I'd love to make a following and have just a group of guys to just talk about this college football stuff with. I've also made every single conference predictions as well as my final top 25 predictions. So if you guys want to check that out, just look at my channel and it's right there. Thank you guys for watching the All Balls Show with Sam Warren.